الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. To proceed, today's lesson بإذن الله ta'ala, we are going to continue our discussion of inna wa akhawatuha, meaning inna and its related huruf that we started to speak about in our previous lesson. And this, as we mentioned, is a particularly exciting subject, and the reason being is because they resemble al-fi'lu, the verb, in that they affect an ismun. And that's particularly interesting, for inna is a harfun. And so far we have looked at al-af'alu and their effect upon an ismun in that they make it mansuba. Now we have a group of harufun that have the same effect. The other reason why they're particularly interesting is because they are bi'idhnillahi ta'ala very easy to understand. And that's always a good thing when you're studying Arabic grammar. Today's lesson, we need to continue the discussion and speak about the two parts of the i'rab, the grammatical analysis of inna when it enters upon al-jumla al-ismiyya. So where do we begin? With our inwan, which is, we will call it ahwalu ismi inna wa akhawatiha. Hasan. So the states of ismi inna. So we know therefore that inna wa akhawatuha enter upon al-jumlatul ismiyah, and al-jumlatul ismiyah ordinarily comprises of al-mubtada'u and al-khabaru. Simple example therefore, we can say, we need to write this slightly further down in order that we can write the title. So we'll say al-waladu tawilun. Al-waladu tawilun is a jumlatul ismiyah, as we can see. Al-waladu is al-mubtada'u and tawilun is al-khabar. Now, when we enter in al-jumlatul ismiyah, inna, how does it affect al-waladu and how does it affect tawilun? We know from our previous lesson that inna tansibu al-mubtada'a, so it renders this mansubun with a fatha. How does it affect tawilun? Tarfa'u al-khabara, it makes marfu'un al-khabar, and as you can see this is already marfu'un, so we don't need to concern ourselves with changing this. Now, if we are going to perform the i'rabun, the analysis of this sentence, how would we do it? Well, inna, which says harfun mushabbihun bil fi'li, harfun mushabbihun bil fi'li, and it's mabniyun ala al-fathi, it is fixed upon the fatha. Al-walada is ismu inna, so this is called ismu inna, the ismu inna. So we say therefore that al-waladu is mansubun wa alamatu nasbihi al-fathatu al-dhahiratu ala akhirihi. The indicator for being mansubun is al-fatha, which is a dhahira to apparent upon the end, ismu inna. So we say al-waladu mansubun wa alamatu nasbihi al-fathatu al-dhahiratu ala akhirihi ismu inna. And it is ismu inna. What therefore is tawilun? Tawilun is the khabaru inna. Khabaru inna. And that is marfu'un. The indicator for it being marfu'un is tanweenu dammin, or ad-dammatu ad-dhahiratu ala akhirihi, the dhamma which is apparent upon the ending. Now, these are the two parts of inna. We have ismu inna, and then we have khabaru inna. That's straightforward, inshallah ta'ala. But today's lesson, we need to talk about the states or ahwalu ismu inna. And what that means is, well, what can the ismu inna actually be? What types of words can constitute ismu inna? Well, the simple answer to that is that it can only be an ismun. It can only be an ismun, as we say, sarihun, an apparent or a clear ismun noun. So what's therefore excluded if we say it can only be an ismun? It cannot be a jumlatun. It cannot be a jumlatun. So we cannot use in the place of ismu inna al-jumla, such as inna kataba al-waladu, and so on and so forth. It can't be al-jumlatul fi'liya. Nor can it be what we say shibhul jumla. It cannot be shibhul jumla that comprises either of a harfu jar and an ismun, or dharfun and an ismun. We know from our previous lessons that that is what we call shibhul jumla. It cannot be that. It can only be an ismun, which is straightforward. And it helps us to exclude everything else if we know that it can only be ismu inna. So, if it can only be an ismun, then what other choices do we have? Well, we can say, for example, alladhi. We can use alladhi as ismu inna. Why can we use alladhi as ismu inna? Because alladhi is ismu mawsulin. Ismu mawsulin. So we can say therefore, innalladhi. Innalladhi. Right. Inna, we know, is harfun mushabbihun bil fi'l. And what meaning does it give rise to? A tawqid affirmation. Alladhi, we know, is ismu mawsulin. It's used as a means of connecting that which comes after with that which comes before. Innalladhi, and its meaning is who or which, or if we're talking about an inanimate object, what? Indeed, who. So we can say innalladhi jaa akhuk akhuka hasana. This therefore is our harfun. Alladhi is ismu inna. Now, a khabaru inna in this instance, even though we're not really speaking specifically about khabaru inna, but it is al-jumlah al-fi'liya. It is a verbal sentence. Why? Because ja'a means he came. It's fi'lun madin mabniyun al-fathi. Whenever we have a fi'lun, what do we ask ourselves? Who came? We look for an ismun, which is marfu'un. Do we have one here? Yes. Even though akhun is min al-asma' al-khamsa. It's one of the 5 types of nouns whose grammatical state is not represented by a harakatun, a vowel, but rather by a letter. In this instance, it is al-waw. So therefore, akhuka, meaning your brother, ja'a is the one who came. The meaning therefore is inna alladhi ja'a akhuka, indeed the one who came is your brother. Why did we mention this example? To illustrate that here ismu inna, it can be ismu mawsulin. So it's still an ismun, but it is not al-jumlatul fi'liyyah, nor is it shibhul jumla. It is neither of those. Hasanan. Another example that we could mention, again to illustrate the use of ismu inna as an ismu mawsulin, is using al-muthanna. Alladhayni. Inna alladhayni. Hasan. What does alladhayni mean? Alladhayni is al-muthanna. It is now al-muthanna. So it relates to 2. However, what is the indicator that it is al-muthanna? Ordinarily, it would be alladhani. Alladhani. However, that is a marfu'un state, and the indicator of it being marfu'un is the al-alif. However, in this instance, we have al-ya. And why do we have al-ya? Because alladhayni here needs to be mansubun. It needs to be mansubun. Why? Because inna, as we remember, what does it do? Tansibu. What does it do? Tansibu al-mubtada. It makes mansub al-mubtada. How is the mansubun state represented in ismu mawsulin, which is al-muthanna? It's represented by al-ya. So we say inna alladhayni. Now we need to have a verb, for example, that is also muthanna. Dhahaba. Inna alladhayni dhahaba. How do we say your 2 brothers? Akhawaka. Akhawaka. The meaning of this is therefore Inna alladhayni dhahaba akhawaka. Indeed, those who dhahaba went, akhawaka are your 2 brothers. Again, the indicator here that it is al-muthanna and it is marfu'un is al-alifu. Hasanan. Another example, if we take the plural, what is the plural male of alladhi? It is alladhina. So if we use a different harf here, and we can say, for example, la'alla. La'alla. That's rather elongated. Fatha. La'alla. Alladhina. Alladhina. Hasan. What does la'alla mean? La'alla, it is used for at-taraji, hoping, expecting. La'alla, perhaps. Alladhina, and then we can say, for example, fazu. What does fazu mean? Faqad faza fawzan azima. We read it all time in the ayah. In Surah Al-Ahzab, in Khutbatu Al-Hajj, faza means he is successful. لَعَلَّ الَّذِينَ فَازُوا إِخْوَتُكَ. So we can say إِخْوَتُكَ. كإخوتك. The meaning therefore is perhaps those who succeeded إخوتك are your brothers. Again, nice and simple, nothing complicated here. Point to note is الذين in the marfu'un state, in the mansubun state, and in the majrurun state. In all three states it is fixed in this manner. Therefore, we say that this is still في محل نصب. It's in the position of it being mansubun. It is in the position of it being mansubun. Fazu, we know, is fi'lun madin. It's plural. Fazu, they are successful. And ikhwatuka, meaning your brothers. Hasanan, if we take another example and say, I'll use anna alimtu. Alimtu. What does alimtu mean? I know, or I'm aware. Anna. So remember the difference between inna and anna. Inna lil ibtida is for the beginning. Anna is for continuation. Alimtu anna allati. Anna. See, this all needs to go forward here. Allati. Note that the ismu inna here is allati and not anna. Alimtu anna allati. So what's the difference between alladhi and allati? The difference is that allati is for the female. So anna allati fazat. So now this is the khabaru inna. Fazat. Again, that means she was successful. Alimtu anna allati fazat ukhtuka. Ukhtuka. I learnt that the one who succeeded, ukhtuka, is your sister. Here, what do we see? That anna is used rather than inna, because we've already introduced our sentence with alimtu. And our ismu inna is allati. Our ismu inna is allati. And we know that the ismu inna must be mansubun. Hasanan, because that's the effect that anna has upon it. But allati is mabniyun ala sakuni. So what do we say? We say it is ismu mawsulin fi mahalli nasbin ismu inna, or in this case ismu anna. Fazat ukhtuka is khabaru inna, or in this case khabaru anna. Nice and simple, as I mentioned, nothing inherently complicated about the concept of having ismu mawsulin as an ismu inna. Another example that we could mention is al-mu'allimu. So we'll use a different mu'allimu. Al-mu'allimu hadirun. Hadirun. What does al-mu'allimu hadirun mean? It means the teacher hadirun is present. Lakinna. Lakinna. What does lakinna mean? It's for al-istidrak. We mentioned it's for al-istidrak and al-tawqid, for commenting upon and affirming that which comes next. Again, what we need to do is move these two along so it makes more sense. This is a harfun here. Harfun. So what does it mean up to this point? Al-muallimu hadirun. The teacher is present. Lakin, however. So let's think of a suitable ending for this sentence. What would we say? Lakin, however, at-tilmid. Right. At-tilmid. It's not a very good dal. So let's change that. At-tilmid. Right. I haven't asked you this for a while. What would be on at-tilmid here? It would be, right, mansubun. Why? Because lakinna, what does it do to the ismu? It tansibu al-isma. At-tilmid, and then, so this therefore is now ismu, I will say it's ismu lakinna, ismu lakinna. Lakinna at-tilmidha ghaibun, which means absent. So the meaning therefore is the teacher is present, but the student ghaibun is absent. However, the point is lakinna is a harfun, ismu lakinna is a talmidha, and therefore ghaibun is khabaru lakinna. Now of course here, when we say ismu lakinna, even though we're talking about ismu inna, it's making it appropriate to the actual harfun that we're using, so don't let that confuse you. Point to note is at-tilmidha is mansubun. The indicator for being mansubun is al-fathatu al-dhahiratu ala akhirihi, and ghaibun of course is marfu'un, and the indicator for being marfu'un is tanweenu dammin, and that is our example of using lakin, the meaning of which is the teacher is present, but at-tilmidha, the student, is absent. Hasanan, and to conclude therefore a final example of another ismu mawsulin. We'll use another ismu mawsulin, but this time we'll use a ma. So note that ma here is another type of ismu mawsulin. It's not only used as a nafi in order to negate, it's also one of the asma'u al-mawsula. So what are we going to say? Later. Remember that later is a harfun al-mushabbih bil-fi'l. It's one of inna wa akhawatuha. It conveys the meaning of a tamanni, wanting or wishing something that's not likely to take place. Later, ma. Right, so what are we going to say? Later, ma. In fact, let's realize this is now in the wrong position. So let's move our harfun here, so it's absolutely clear that that is a harfun. Later. Ma is now a ismun, even though we mean ismu later. And let's erase this. Later ma natamannahu. Let's say that. Later ma natamannahu. Ma natamannahu hasilun. That's an interesting sentence, isn't it? Later ma natamannahu hasilun. And that is a khabarun. First of all, what does it mean? Later, would that. Ma, what. Remember, ma here is ismu mawsulin. It means what. Later ma, would that. What. Natamannahu. Natamanna, tamanna. So here we're actually using the verb tamanna. And this is a tamanni, wanting or wishing. Ma natamannahu, that. What. Natamannahu, we wish. who, and that's maf'ulun bihi. What we wish for, hasilun means taking place. So would that what we wish for takes place. Right, so what's interesting about this sentence? We start with later, which is, we know harfun mushabbihun bil fi'li. Then we have our ismu later, or we just stopped here with ismun, but what we mean is ismu later, and that is ma. So note, we're not negating natamannahu here. We're actually using ma as ismu mawsulin. Later ma natamannahu, that we wish for it. Hasilun is hasilun, present or takes place. So we hope, inshallah ta'ala, that those examples that we mentioned further clarify the meaning of ismu inna, its usage. It's not particularly complicated as I mentioned, because the ismu inna can only ever be an ismun. That makes it very simple with regards to constructing sentences using a harfun mushabbihun bil fi'l. Why? Because it excludes other sentences and it excludes shibhul jumla. That's all that we want to say regarding this for the moment. We'll carry on our discussion relating to this in our next lesson, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.